Shalom, damn it! This is Rabbi Sol Solomon, thrilled to be here on the Dave's Gone By radio program, and even more thrilled to talk to a documentary filmmaker who makes movies about all the subjects that I hold near and dear. He loves the American theater and the Broadway musical, and for public television he's made wonderful documentaries about these things, like Broadway, the American musical, and he did a documentary about the Tomaszewskis, the Yiddish theater family that spawned Michael Tilson Thomas. And oh my God, he did even a movie about banjos. I don't know why the hell he did banjos. All right, not my favorite thing, but the other stuff I love. And now, and he did a show, a documentary series called Make 'em Laugh about comedy in America. So, such wonderful things to make movies about. And the person that I am talking to has a brand new documentary, a 90-minute special on PBS that is debuting on New Year's Day, January 1st. It's called Broadway Musicals, A Jewish Legacy. So, now you know why I am incredibly thrilled to be talking to writer, producer, and director Michael Kantor. Shalom, Michael.
Shalom, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you for appearing on this program. So tell me, please, let's start at the latest thing. What gave you the idea, and who gave you the money to make a documentary about the Jewish effect on Broadway theater?
Well, this was actually an idea from a Boston-based producer with a great name. Her name is Barbara Brilliant.
Oh, well, there you go.
And she called me after my Emmy-winning series, Broadway, the American Musical, aired, and she said, you did 6 hours on the history of Broadway, but you didn't talk about the fact that all of the songwriters, the composers and lyricists were Jewish. It's a phenomenon. Why don't you tell that story? And I said, well, I think of that as a different story. It's its own story. And she said, let's make that film. And I said, go raise the money. And she did. And thanks in large part to a wonderful supporter named Albert M. Tapper, who contributed mightily in both financial and other ways to the program. He brought what my kids might say, ruach, real spirit to the film. We got it done, and it will air January 1st. Joel Grey is the narrator, and it's really a wonderful film.
Joel Grey from Cabaret, of course, and he was in Wicked for a while. Well, Al Tapper, is he also a composer-songwriter? I've heard that name before.
Al Tapper is a composer-songwriter. He created most recently a show about musical about baseball called National Pastime. And he also produced a great documentary called Broadway, the Golden Age.
Oh, yes, of course.
With a filmmaker named Rick McKay. So he was a wonderful collaborator on this.
This is good. So is this how it is once you've done a couple of these movies? You're connected to this person who's connected to that person. They make some phone calls, and if you're lucky, it still takes forever. But you get the wherewithal.
This one took 3 years. The Broadway 6-part series took almost 9 years.
Oh, my God.
My joke was my daughter was born right at the beginning of the project, and when it was about to come out, she said, Dad, I'm the most important person to ever see this film. And I said, why? She said, I've been waiting my whole life for it.
Oh, my God. But tell me, so this is, you put your heart and your soul into, going back to that 6-part series, Broadway, the American musical, right? How do you live for 9 years? I mean, is there money parceled out year after year for you to live on in the budget? Or are you doing other things and then you paid later? How does that all work?
Well, it took 9 years because I was doing other projects along the way. My wife, thank God, had a good job, and there were times where I was definitely paying forward the project, deferring salary, but in the end, thankfully, it was a big hit, and it turned out okay.
Actually, when you say that a show is a big hit, what does that mean besides the reviews? Like, if you have a show on public television, is there then rights that are sold elsewhere? I mean, how do you reap
well,
a
first off, people think, a movie's a big hit when it makes $100 million. Well, if tickets are $10 a ticket, then that's 10 million people who saw that movie. Well, the Broadway series, my 6-hour series, was seen by 15 million people. Its first airing, it re-aired this year. So that's number one. A lot of people see it. Two, it won the Emmy, which was really gratifying, having worked that long. 93, people loved both the DVD and the book. The book's been reprinted in paperback, and the DVD sold, I think, 330,000 copies. So it's just nice when people embrace the work that way and want to give it as a present to their grandkids or vice versa.
So let me ask, in making Broadway the American musical, what were your most exciting moments, the people that you talked to that you couldn't believe you were sitting there in a room with, and your favorite and best anecdotes?
Well, on Broadway the American musical, now I think of my very first interview, which was in 1996 with Al Hirschfeld, illustrator, who I grew up with. Every Sunday morning we'd sit in the living room and we'd look for the Ninas in the drawings of Al Hirschfeld in the Sunday New York Times. And I actually interviewed him 3 times. He was 93, he was, I think, 96 and 98 when I interviewed him, because he saw every Broadway show. For this new project, this is a 90-minute show for great performances that airs next week, January 1st, for the first time at 9:30 p.m. But check your local listing.
Well, yes, I'm in Colorado. It's not good. Well, maybe it's 9:30 here. I'm not sure. But yes.
I had a great opportunity to interview songwriters, and John Kantor played bits of cabaret for me, and
who else?
Tim Schwartz sang songs from Wicked and Godspell.
Did you get Sondheim?
Sondheim was too busy this time, but thankfully I had an interview with him banked for the other series that we were able to use. So he's featured in the series.
Oh, that's so important.
Show, rather.
What is it? Since we're now talking again about the current series, the new one, the Jewish legacy of Broadway musicals, what is it about Jews? Why were we the ones who essentially created the Broadway musical? Did it come out of Yiddish theater more than, say, Gilbert and Sullivan or opera or English music hall? Why was it us?
Well, I think of it's a phenomenon. When you hear of a weather phenomenon or a sports phenomenon, there's no easy explanation. It sort of comes out of nowhere. But no question, the Yiddish theater and people like Boris and Bessie Tomaszewski contributed a kind of comedy and humor, and the Yiddish theater was not only to entertain but to instruct people. And I think there is an element in the Broadway musical of you can get the girl, you can succeed in America. It's that sort of optimistic aspect that I think it derives from the Yiddish theater. And of course, what's interesting about this 90-minute film, which again airs January 1st, is that...
You're so Jewish. I love it. When does it air? Could you tell us again?
January 1st,
okay.
9:30 p.m. on PBS. The musical is A Jewish Legacy. It looks at how liturgical melodies can inform a Broadway musical. I mean, the most staggering moment for me was hearing Maury Yeston, who's the great composer of both the musical Titanic and...
Nine, I think.
And Nine. He played a Jewish prayer, and he helps you understand in the film how God Bless America is based on a Jewish prayer. Song all the time, and we think, oh, it's American, but in fact, it's an ancient Jewish prayer.
My God. I mean, I thought you were going to do like Irving Berlin and White Christmas because, you know, a Jew wrote the most famous Christmas song, and you can hear Jewish sort of minor key melodies in a lot of what Gershwin might have been doing or those folks. But I wasn't expecting God, but it's major key. What prayer was it taking from?
Well, offhand, I'd butcher it if I tried to sing the prayer, but it's a melodic progression that you'll have to see in the film.
Shema Yisrael, Hail, Adonai Eloheinu, B'Shamayim.
But there's an easy one, which is in Porgy and Bess. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorah. It ain't necessarily so. Literally, it's the exact prayer that you'd say in front of reading the Torah that is used in Porgy and Bess in a song that's debunking the Bible. That the song is about how everything you read in the Bible ain't necessarily so, and the Gershwins were very clever to include that tune. Hi, this is Michael Kantor, the producer-director of Broadway musicals Jewish Legacy. It airs on PBS January 1st, and you're listening to Dave's Gone By on UNC Radio.
The weird part for me is that the legacy still continues, that apart from, okay, fair enough, Andrew Lloyd Webber, apart from him, and he almost has a Jewish last name anyway, so he would count except he did Jesus Christ Superstar. But you still, to this day, there's Stephen Schwartz, you got
Sure, Andrew Lippa, who just did Addams Family, is in the film, and John Kander, and there's lots of...
William Finn is also a Yidlach, David Yazbek, who was on this radio program a couple of weeks ago. It's still going on. Adam Gettl, of course, it makes sense, but...
I mean, what we point out is that it was never an exclusive, the way, there are lots of jokes about exclusive country clubs. Broadway was never exclusive. Cole Porter's there, Meredith Wilson, Vincent Youmans, but almost all the songwriters are Jewish. And what they've done is they've created an art form that now everyone from Elton John to Lin-Manuel Miranda participate in. And that doesn't mean, there aren't still great Jewish composers, but they established a form that, is very flexible and can do lots of things, but that's the legacy.
Were there any surprises in doing this documentary? Anything, aside from the liturgical thing that you just mentioned, but other things that, I didn't know that. I didn't know so-and-so is Jewish, or I didn't know this happened, or this particular anecdote or story was like, really?
Well, it was interesting to learn about in Cabaret. Joel Gray's our narrator. His father, Mickey Katz, was a famous comedian singer. And when we were...
He was in a Spike Jones band, in fact.
Exactly. He was with Spike Jones. And Joel can sing Home on the Range in Yiddish. I mean, that was one of the first things he ever did on stage, was accompany his father.
Hey, Muffin Line, or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, he in the Cabaret production, there was a song written for Joel Gray, the MC, and a gorilla. And it's called the Gorilla Song. And it's also known as If You Could See Her Through My Eyes.
Right, yes.
And it ended with a phrase, she wouldn't look Jewish at all. And it was a dark humor about how the Nazis were demonizing Jews. And the audience was intended to enjoy the song all the way through, and then the last second go, oh my God, I'm enjoying the way Nazis are twisting things. And in the play, it couldn't be performed that way. Hal Prince was the director and producer, and he thought, this is too sensitive an issue for Broadway. We can't allow this to be on stage. People will walk out. And then 4 or 5 years later, when the movie was made, audiences had kind of caught up, and in the movie, you hear the song as it was written.
Yeah, it's the most stunning moment one of the most stunning moments in that great film of Cabaret. It's wonderful. We're talking, by the way, with Michael Kantor. Speaking of wonderful films, he is the documentary maker of such films as The Tomaszewskis, Music and Memories of a Life in the Yiddish Theater. You were a co-producer on that. Also, of course, the 6-part Broadway the American Musical. And Give Me the Bet. Why? Someone must have asked you to do a film about banjos.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine had worked, Mark Fields, who's actually a descendant of Lou Fields, of all people, had worked on a film about the banjo for many years. And I was lucky in that I was able to executive produce it, and Steve Martin became a part of the film. He's both the host and the narrator. And it's a uniquely American instrument. It was fun to do.
May I ask you, what exactly is an executive producer as opposed to a producer?
The executive producer makes sure that the film is distributed properly. I was able to help make the deal with PBS so that it aired as part of a new arts initiative that PBS was doing. And it's someone with enough experience so as not to tell a filmmaker what to do, but when a filmmaker reaches crossroads and they say, oh, I could go this way or go that way, the executive producer can ask the right questions and say, well, what are you really trying to do? And hopefully that helps the film turn out as well as it can.
Cool. I was always wondering the different levels, because you're a producer and a director. So a director out there with the cameras in the trenches, picking the shots, doing the interviews on all that. Producer, you're all behind the scenes.
Producer, you're writing the grant requests. You're making sure that everybody shows up at the shoots. You're making sure that the hotel bill gets paid for that room you've rented. The director is making sure that the questions and the follow-up questions are good, and that the look of the shots matches between different interviews, and the writer obviously has thought up the whole thing.
Are you, at this point, a corporation, or do you still almost more of a hired gun? How does that all work?
I create a different company for every project I do, which is ridiculous, but it's the only way to keep everything separate, because I often get government money from the National Endowment of Humanities or National Endowment of the Arts, and that money has to be kept separate. So I am a freelancer in the sense that I create my own projects, but every film has a different company.
Now, let me also ask Michael Kantor. I've been saving this one because I have to admit, even as much as the Jewishness and the Broadway is exciting to me, you also did a documentary called Make 'em Laugh, The Funny Business of America, another 6-part documentary for public television. I mean, that had to be also a labor of love, even if they asked you to do it. I mean, how do you tackle, same way with the Broadway, such an enormous subject and squeeze it into 6 hours?
Well, that maybe was the hardest film I've ever made. Everyone thinks, oh, comedy. My wife would call me. She'd say, what are you doing? I said, I'm watching Laurel and Hardy. And she'd say, that's work? And I'd say, no, I have to understand Laurel and Hardy. Dying is easy. Comedy is hard.
Yeah, I've learned that.
We got, once again, Billy Crystal was the host, and he created these wonderful intros for each episode. And Amy Sedaris brought her wonderfully quirky sensibility to the narration. And instead of going chronologically, the way we do in most of these other shows, we broke up the world of comedy into, wise guys and oddballs and, sitcoms, homemakers and breadwinners and homemakers and different categories, so that, Woody Allen and Jonathan Winters don't have a lot in common, but they are both kind of outsiders and oddballs, and so we found ways to group comedic lines together.
And the decision, was it yours or theirs when you say, okay, we're going to do a 6-part documentary, each part maybe an hour, or I don't know if they were an hour and a half or something like that, but at a certain point, did you want to just call PBS and say, you know what, can we make this a 12-hour documentary? Can we do this comedy Alexander plots or something?
No,
how does that work?
Does the 12 and 18-hour shows, in part because he raises enough money. The 6-hour show is expensive enough to sort of package together with lots of co-production partners, the BBC and NHK in Japan chip in money. And I think, once you get past 6 hours, it's hard for anybody to watch it. It's just too much of a commitment. So I like 3 hours, 6 hours, or in the case of Broadway musicals, A Jewish Legacy, 90 minutes is the perfect sitting.
Well, that's, I don't know, I could see 10 hours of Jews on Broadway. I mean, just keep them coming, for God's sakes. Just put Ethel Merman up there for the first 20 minutes, I'm happy. Yeah.
Well, there's another fascinating thing that happened in this film, which is we discovered that Ethel Merman's not Jewish.
Oh, no! Oh, my God!
She was born Ethel Zimmerman, and if you watch this film, you'll learn a fascinating story by Arthur Lawrence, who wrote the book To Gypsy, about Ethel Merman attending a Seder in Philadelphia that was hosted by the composer Julie Stein. Very funny story.
Well, okay, so you're not going to tell us what it is. We have to see it. But I also found out recently that Charlie Chaplin, everybody thought he's not. Isn't that tragic?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I assumed, because he did The Great Dictator, and he was, from England, doing all that, and it wasn't. Sad, tragic, terrible news. But exciting news that Michael Kantor's documentary, Broadway Musicals, A Jewish Legacy, airs at 9:30. It debuts 9:30 in the evening on January 1st, this New Year's Day on public television in New York. Check your local listings, of course, for more of that. But I still have to pump you for more anecdotes and things about the Make 'em Laugh series that you did. Who else did you interview? Who made you roar that you weren't expecting? Who was kind of a jerk that you weren't expecting? Tell me.
Well, my favorite interview for that series was my own comedic hero, George Carlin.
Oh.
And I interviewed him about a year before he died. He was the kind of guy, when I grew up, you'd go to your friend's basement, you'd put on his albums, and you'd laugh your ass off, and you made sure that the parents weren't around because it was the kind of stuff that, you know,
sure,
they wouldn't appreciate. They were a different generation. And he was just so funny, his oxymorons, the jumbo shrimp, the military intelligence, and his line about you park in the driveway, but you drive on the parkway. I mean, he was just so brilliant, and I'm actually hoping to make a film with the woman he spent the last 10 years of his life with about his perspective on the world.
Well, that would be so interesting. I just, a couple of weeks ago, was reading his autobiography, which he, thank God, Tony Hendra finished it after he died.
Yes.
But, I would love to see a real documentary about George Carlin. For me, even though he wasn't Jewish, another tragedy.
No.
But I would make him almost an honorary Jew. I would do it. Totally do that. Let me ask, since you also did that documentary about the Tomaszewskis, Boris Tomaszewski, that whole Yiddish family, I'm sure you did some digging into Yiddish theater. Who was left at this point, besides maybe Feivish Finkel?
Feivish Finkel, that's about it. You know, you read obits occasionally of someone who, you know, had something to do, who's 95 and had something to do with the Yiddish theater. But John Kantor came to New York in the early 50s, and he said he'd missed it. And, yeah, I mean, there, don't get me wrong, I think it's the Yiddish Volksbühne that recreates Yiddish plays, but the original American Yiddish theater, unfortunately, is no longer around.
Well, it's kind of understandable, but I was just wondering, when you did that documentary, who were you able to get even then, or was it all archival?
No, that project actually was a project of Michael Tilson Thomas's. Michael Tilson Thomas, the noted maestro who runs the San Francisco Orchestra and the New World Symphony in Miami and is always traveling around the world, he created an orchestra called the YouTube Orchestra, where the people auditioned via YouTube and came together in Australia for a big concert. His grandparents were the pioneers of the American Yiddish theater, Boris and Bessie Tomaszewski.
Right. Yes.
He wanted to honor them by telling their story, and he created a show in which he hosted.
Oh, Judy Blazer was in that, right?
Blazer's in that, and Schuler Hensley, and some other great performers with a full orchestra. And he told the story of their journey to America and the creation of the Yiddish theater and competition with the Adlers and so forth. But it was very much from that perspective. It wasn't a comprehensive look at everyone who was in the Yiddish theater. It was what happened to the Tomaszewskis. And he told the story, and my job was really to help support that with interesting images and to make sure that the performance was filmed properly.
Yeah, no, I remember coming on that on the TV about halfway through and watching it to the end, and I'd forgotten that it was more of a show or a review cabaret production for film.
It's on Netflix. You can rent it there. You can also get it from New Video. It's a home video company that's online. And that's a 90-minute show as well with a bunch of DVD extras, too.
Now, can I ask how you went, because you started... we're talking, by the way, with Michael Kantor. You started writing. You were a journalist, an arts journalist, writing for places like 7 Days and Interview Magazine and Theater Week. How did you morph from that into movies?
Well, I was trained as a theater director. I went to school, and Alan Schneider, the noted director of Beckett and Albee and existential drama, he was my mentor until he was killed in London. And I moved to New York and did a show with Adam Gettle and did a couple of shows and was sort of out of work and was freelance writing when a friend of mine was working with Ken Burns on a show about Charles Lindbergh. And I had staged the Bertolt Brecht Kurt Weill cantata called Der Lindbergh-Flug. I'd staged that in an airplane hangar in San Diego, which is where Lindbergh built the Spirit of St. Louis, as a sort of a funky, performance piece. And I knew a lot about Lindbergh, and so Ken Burns and Steve Ives said, hey, do you want to join this documentary we're making? And I said, sure. I thought, all the great filmmakers, Eisenstein and Orson Welles, started in theater and they moved into film.
Right.
And so I worked on Lindbergh, and then Steve and I went out and we made a film about a theater company called Cornerstone, which was run by Bill Rausch, who's now head of the Ashland, Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Wow.
And Cornerstone is sort of a real-life Waiting for Guffman. They'd go into towns which had very little cultural activity, and they'd cast townspeople in classic plays like Moliere's Tartuffe or Romeo and Juliet, and they'd adapt the play to the town. And we made a film about a production they did of The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. And then I thought, well, Ken Burns makes these historical epics about American history. No one's making that about American culture. Why don't I take what I know, which is the theater and arts and so forth, and do for PBS what he's doing for history, American history. And so I did, as you mentioned, I first did the Broadway musical and then comedy, and the current project is looking at the Broadway musical from a different angle. Broadway musical's a Jewish legacy, but my next project, which will air a year from now,
yes,
is on superheroes. Amazingly, another Jewish story. Most of the guys who created superheroes, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Joe Simon, Jerry Robinson, guys who created Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and Fantastic Four and Avengers, they're all Jewish guys.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because we all want, we feel like not just Clark Kent, we feel like Arnold Stang playing Clark Kent. And then we go into the phone booth and boom, there we are. That's what we want to be to the world. We want to make believe that we're going to come out with a cape and save people and lift buildings and purify the water.
I'll tell one quick story about Jerry Siegel, who dreamed up Superman in the midst of the Depression.
Please.
He was such a nerd. He used to oversleep, and he used to just pull on his pants over his pajamas. And he'd show up at school, and kids would make fun of him because his pajamas were peeking out from the bottom of the pants. And that's where he came up with the idea of Superman just ripping off his regular clothes, and there underneath is this outfit. In Superman's case, the sort of spandex unitard.
They're really embarrassed.
That came from this sort of nerdy kid who couldn't get up in the morning.
The most embarrassing part of this is that I personally know the host of this radio program, Dave Lefkowitz, very, very well. And to this day, in the winter, he will still wear pajamas under his pants to keep a little bit warmer. And sometimes he'll notice, he'll look down at his feet. He's like, oh, yeah, I got to tuck that in my socks. So,
he's Superman in disguise.
It continued. This is Super Jew. That's right. Super Jew. And we're talking to the Super Jew, Michael Kantor. Just have a couple of minutes left with this fine documentary maker. I did, what else did I want to ask you about here? What did you learn mostly from working with people like Rick Burns and Ken Burns?
Well, I guess I learned that, there's a real craft to making a documentary film in the same way that there's a craft to making fine furniture. You can buy an IKEA bed or table and it can work fine. It can work perfectly well. But if you learn how to make a cabinet with special wood and with certain ways of, tongue and groove cabinetry, it can be a beautiful thing that can last for generations. And that's what I aspire to do, which is to take more time to make these programs, but hopefully to contribute something that will last.
Well, let me ask you, actually, if we're talking about Broadway, or even the new one, the Jewish Legacy one, is it when you go to do the interview, do you know how the quotes that you hope they will say will fit into the hour that you're going to do? Or do you research, obviously, the person that you're talking to, you ask them a bunch of questions, and then it's transcribed, and suddenly you've got 25 interviews, and now you got to figure how they all piece together?
It's more the latter. I mean, I feel like if you go in and you're expecting someone to give a certain answer, then that's what I call paint-by-numbers filmmaking. Oh, we're going to get this color answer, we're going to get this color, and it's going to make a cute little picture. And the really interesting questions, and this I learned from Ken Burns, are the broadest questions. You know, Ken used to ask everyone, who was Abraham Lincoln? And he'd get a wide variety of responses. So I like to ask those kind of broad, almost naive questions. You know, I had the pleasure of interviewing Arthur Miller one time. And I kicked myself because I didn't say, you know, who was Willie Loman? Instead, I asked some super specific question, and of course I got a super specific answer, but I should have asked the broadest question, you know, who was Willie Loman? And he'd say something that you just never expect.
That's actually a wonderful tactic. Now that I think about that, wow! I'm so glad we're talking to Michael Kantor. I do also have to ask, one of the other projects that you did work on was the anniversary release, I guess, for DVD and also perhaps for the movies of the Sound of Music. With
Boy, the rabbi does his homework.
Well, this is what Jews do. We can't ski. We can't fix a car, but we can go on the internet and Google questions, of course. So, what's Julie Andrews really like?
That was a fantastic project. Julie Andrews hosted my 6-hour history of Broadway, and when they came to her and suggested that she work on a 40th anniversary program tied to the Sound of Music, she pulled me in, and in addition to doing an interview with a reminiscence between Julie and Chris Plummer, which was fantastic, and a story of Julie Andrews' favorite things from the movie, I was privileged to go to Salzburg with Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, the eldest daughter in the movie. Oh. And she took me to some of the sites where the film was made, and also to the original Von Trapp home, where the actual family lived.
You know, it's now a Starbucks. I don't know if you knew this, but no, I'm kidding.
I know it was turned into some kind of commercial venture. I don't know if there is a Starbucks in it, but
actually, I was joking, but I'm probably not so joking.
It was at first a monastery, and now I think it's a consulate for another country. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's made into a tourist attraction because it's beautiful. It's a beautiful home. It's not nearly as grand as what you see in the movie, but outside was after the Von Trapps left. It was either Himmler or Goering, one of the main Nazi generals, made it his headquarters because you can see Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat from Salzburg. It's very nearby, and out back behind the former Von Trapp home is like a bunker where they've kept to this day, Himmler or Goering's stuff in the bunker. It's really scary.
Whoa. Oh, I wasn't expecting all that. A sweet little chalet with the children.
But interestingly, that ties back to Broadway musicals, A Jewish Legacy, because in Sound of Music, Theodore Bickel, the actor who played Captain Von Trapp, he escaped from Austria as a 13-year-old and went to Palestine and then to London and ultimately to the U.S. And on the DVD extras, he tells a story about being in Vienna and watching Hitler drive past his window in a parade and quickly fleeing the country. And it's fascinating sort of cyclical history that in the Broadway musical, in which there's so much silliness and fun and optimism, there are these deep, dark currents of real-life stories. Hi, this is Michael Kantor, the producer-director of Broadway musicals A Jewish Legacy, and you're listening to Dave's Gone By on UNC Radio.
I hope you did tackle this somewhere in Broadway musicals A Jewish Legacy. I hope this did not wind up on the cutting room floor. But were you able to ask people how come there's never been a revival of the Zulu and the Zeta?
Sorry, that's on the cutting room floor.
It was the show that made Lou Gossett Jr. And Menashe Skolnick was in it. Please, go back, make some phone calls. This should be, I know you've got the
that
superhero.
That should be Jewish Legacy Part 2.
That should be the first 10 minutes of that film. very, very important. And it's wonderfully important to be talking to Michael Kantor. He is the producer and director of the 90-minute special on PBS happening this New Year's Day, January 1st, 9:30 in the afternoon, in the evening Eastern Time, Broadway musicals, A Jewish Legacy. My last question for you, Mr. Kantor, is, so is the superhero film on the editing room floor? Is it completed? Where is it at?
We're just editing it now. We will have it done for next fall with a companion book.
Of course.
It's very exciting. We've interviewed Stan Lee and Jerry Robinson, who created the Joker. So that's the next project. I mean, we're just finishing up. We actually may create a book tied to Broadway musicals, A Jewish Legacy. So that project should continue. And I understand that a lot of your listeners are on college campuses. I just encourage them to get out and do theater. When I was in college, I did a theater company called the 49-cent Theater, and that's what we charged to come in. And you don't need a fancy editing system, and you don't need much but a little auditorium, and get out there and stretch those creative muscles.
I totally and completely 100,000,000% agree with Michael Kantor. Michael, it's been a joy and a pleasure having you in the Daverhood on Dave's Gone By. Much success with your new documentary, with the documentary a year from now, and whatever you'll be working on 2 or 10 years from now. If it's the Carlin thing, how many things do you have on your drawing board at one time to think?
You have to have at least 3, or you end up with these periods of big depression when you don't have anything going on.
So what's their third?
Well, I got the Carlin thing, I've got superheroes, and the movie Carrie was made into a show.
Right.
And there may be a documentary tracing the history of Carrie.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so you'll find Ken Mandelbaum and you ask him some questions, and then you'll... the people who were... No, seriously. He wrote that book. Of course, you know.
Sure, yeah.
Anyway, we're wandering off into little nooks and crannies. Well, again, you should be focusing on the Zulu and the Zeta. That should be your next project, I'm telling you. Michael Kantor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.